year is 48 CE, and somewhere in Rome, a senator is having the worst night of his life. The streets reek of piss and rotting fish, the walls so thin he can hear every grunt, every moan, every transaction of flesh for coin. He's paid, chosen his room, and now waits for the woman known as Lysa. She enters with a dark wig that looks ripped from a theater prop, coal smudged around her eyes, as if applied in the dark, and perfume so thick it practically assaults the senses. Myrrh and roses fighting desperately to cover a scent of wealth and power. Their eyes meet, and the senator realizes the impossible. Before him stands Valeria Messalina, the Empress of Rome. Not a lookalike, not a courtesan playing dress-up. The actual Empress, wife of Claudius, mother of the imperial heirs, her visage stamped on coins across the empire, working in a brothel for pleasure. Let that image settle like a stone dropped into black water. This is no mere scandal. This is what happens when you take a 15-year-old girl, dress her as a goddess, hand her absolute power, and tell her the only thing she cannot do is use it. Rome in 38 CE looked invincible, marble temples gleaming, aqueducts carrying mountain water into the city, the forum thronged with senators debating grain prices and campaigns. But beneath the veneer, the empire was rotting. Tiberius had died paranoid and alone on Capri. Caligula followed, 4 years of absolute madness, executions as entertainment, an attempt to make his horse consul, senators forced to witness his depravity firsthand. When the Praetorian Guard finally moved on January 24, 41 CE, they stabbed him 29 times, murdered his wife, and smashed his infant daughter's skull against a wall. Rome does nothing halfway. Then Claudius emerged, hiding behind a curtain, drooling and stammering, a family embarrassment now wearing purple. He was proclaimed emperor not for skill, but survival, breathing and bearing the right bloodline. Claudius knew he was a placeholder, a joke with a crown. Desperate to legitimize his reign, he needed heirs. Proof that the gods had not abandoned Rome. Enter Valeria Messalina 15, descended from ancient lineages, her beauty so striking poets built careers chronicling it. She had been groomed to embody virtue, to lower her eyes, speak softly, to be the living icon of chastity that bound Rome's idealized morality together. On paper, she was perfect. In practice, she was a disaster in the making. What happens when you dress a child as a goddess, place her in a palace where doors open at her whim, where senators bow low enough to kiss the ground, and where her husband, decades older, fears losing the very power he never wanted? You create a chasm between the person she is and the icon she must perform. The empire demanded obedience. She demanded experience. The first 2 years were textbook Roman perfection. Valeria bore Claudius a daughter, Claudia Octavia, then a son, Britannicus. The Senate exhaled. The empire had heirs. She appeared at state functions draped in silk, head covered, eyes downcast, performing virtue like a never-ending play. In public, she was everything Rome demanded. In private, she conducted an experiment in chaos. Rome had always divided women into 2 categories, matrona and meretrix, sacred and profane, wife and courtesan. These categories never touched. She defied them all. Tacitus records that Messalina, under the alias Lysa, frequented brothels regularly, not for survival, not coercion, but for pleasure and power. Every client who failed to recognize her became an unwitting participant in treason. Every man who did recognize her became hers entirely. Rome's morality, always performative, was her weapon. Aristocratic men could keep mistresses and visit brothels with impunity, but women, especially the Empress, were confined to statuesque virtue. Messalina broke the rules, walked straight through the boundaries, and returned before dawn, shedding the wig and perfume, donning imperial silk, attending morning sacrifices with the serene expression of chastity herself. But the brothel was merely the laboratory. The real work happened inside the palace, in shadows where corruption could metastasize unseen. Banquets sprawled across silk couches, golden platters heaped with roasted dormice, peacock tongues, flamingo brains, grotesque excess worthy of Caligula's memory. Wine flowed from jeweled cups. Senators and generals discussed Britain, grain supplies, and politics. Then, with a signal, the doors closed, new guests arrived: gladiators, theater actors, foreign captives, sometimes teenage sons of senators summoned under false pretenses. What followed was horror and fascination, often described as almost pornographic in its detail. Forced performances, humiliating contests, senators paired with political enemies, aristocratic women coerced into the roles of courtesans while their husbands watched. Refusal was impossible. Rumors circulated. A tribune who declined her invitation drowned in the Tiber 3 days later. A nobleman attempting early departure saw his family's estate seized. The message was unmistakable: the Empress accepted no defiance. Pliny the Elder recorded a competition between Messalina and a famed courtesan, Scylla, not for money but for dominance, who could outlast more partners in a single night. 25 for Scylla. Messalina won. Pliny's tone is clinical, like documenting a volcanic eruption. Horrified yet compelled to record history. The account's accuracy is debated, perhaps exaggeration, perhaps propaganda. Yet it survives because it captures the unthinkable, a woman wielding sexual power as dominance, not submission. Rome had no language for it. So they mythologized her, turning scandal into legend. The palace became a theater of power, where shame was currency more valuable than gold. Senators arrived at dawn to plead, left at midnight carrying acts they would never speak of, their families praying daughters returned intact. Most did, some did not. Messalina collected complicity, piece by piece, person by person. Each participant became a prisoner, every witness an accomplice. She did not need Senate approval. She had their shame, and shame endures longer than fear. Meanwhile, Claudius administered the empire, building aqueducts, reforming courts, expanding Britain. Did he know? Of course. But action against her would acknowledge humiliation, admit incapacity to control his household, risk civil war. So he looked away, focused on governance, pretending the rot was elsewhere. This state of affairs persisted until 48 CE, when Messalina finally crossed the threshold of empire, wide tolerance, marrying another man publicly while still Empress, daring Rome itself to intervene. The reaction was swift. Soldiers found her in the gardens, the blade driven home. Rome destroyed her statues, chiseled away her name, and spent 2 millennia calling her a monster, forgetting, of course, that she was a creation of the very system that condemned her. Messalina's story is not merely scandal. It is the product of an empire that made a child goddess and told her she could never wield the very power she embodied. It is the story of desire, intelligence, and cruelty colliding with politics, morality, and fear. She was empress, courtesan, and puppeteer. She weaponized the hypocrisy of an empire to survive and dominate. Her life reminds us that power in Rome was not solely held in the Senate or the legions, but in the spaces men could not control, where performance, fear, and desire converged. Messalina's triumphs were subtle and visible, and terrifying in their quiet efficacy. Even as Rome's chroniclers vilified her, the empire was compelled to bow. She exposed that virtue imposed is fragile, that civilization built on performance can be undermined by those it was meant to restrain. When statues fell, when names were scrubbed from history, Messalina endured in whispers, in fear, and in myth. She remains an example of power unacknowledged and domination exercised not by armies, but by understanding human weakness and human desire. In the end, the story is both horror and fascination, a child turned goddess, a woman turned weapon, an empire forced to confront its own contradictions. And for 2,000 years, Rome's memory of Valeria Messalina has been a cautionary tale, a reminder that power given and denied at the same time can create forces more uncontrollable than any legion, more enduring than marble and gold.